The first snow came early that year, and Renna Blackthorn watched it fall through the slats of the sheep pen with the calm certainty of someone who had seen too many winters to be surprised by one more. She was tallish for a woman, lean and long-muscled from years of driving flocks across high country, her green skin darker than spring grass, and her small tusks barely visible when she kept her mouth closed. The contract she had signed 6 months ago ended tomorrow, and the landowner had made it clear there was no work for her past autumn. That was how it always went. She moved with the seasons, always had, sleeping in barns and shepherd huts, taking whatever work the farms would give an orc, and moving on when the weather turned or the welcome wore thin. But this year, something felt different, and she could not quite name what it was. She finished checking the last ewe, ran her hand along the animal's flank to feel for any sign of trouble, then straightened and wiped her palms on her worn trousers. The wind had teeth in it now, biting through the wool of her jacket, and the sky hung low and gray like a bruise. She had coin enough for a month, maybe 2 if she was careful, but winter lodging cost more than summer work paid, and most innkeepers looked at her tusks and pointed ears and told her they had no rooms. She had slept in worse places, hay lofts, root cellars. Once, an abandoned mill where the snow blew in through the broken windows and she woke with frost in her hair. She would manage. She always did, except this time the thought of it made her chest ache in a way it never had before. She walked out of the pen and latched the gate behind her, then turned toward the main house. It sat on a rise overlooking the valley, stone-built and solid, with smoke rising from the chimney and warm yellow light in the windows. She had been inside only twice, both times to collect her pay, and both times she had felt out of place among the good furniture and clean floors. But she needed to settle accounts, and she needed to do it now before she lost her nerve. The door opened before she could knock. Declan Ashford stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair dusted with early gray, though he could not have been more than 35. He had the kind of face that looked stern until he smiled, and he was smiling now, easy and warm, as though he had been expecting her. "Renna," he said, "come in. I was just making tea." She hesitated. "I only came to settle up. I will not take much of your time." "You will take as much time as tea takes to drink," he said and stepped aside. "It is freezing out there. Get inside." She had learned not to argue with Declan Ashford. He had a way of saying things that made them sound reasonable even when they were not. She stepped over the threshold and pulled the door shut behind her, shutting out the wind and the snow. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like a blanket, and she felt her shoulders drop an inch without meaning to. The kitchen was large and cluttered in a comfortable way, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and a kettle steaming on the stove. Declan poured tea into 2 thick mugs and set one in front of her, then leaned against the counter and wrapped his hands around the other. "You did good work this season," he said. "Best lambing I have had in 3 years. The ewes like you better than they like me." "Ewes like anyone who feeds them," Renna said, but she felt a flicker of pride despite herself. She had worked hard, harder than she needed to, because she wanted him to see that she was worth keeping. "Not that it mattered now, still," Declan said. "I wanted you to know. You earned every penny I paid you and then some." She nodded and drank her tea. It was strong and sweet, the way she liked it, though she had never told him that. He must have noticed. The thought made her feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. "I will be leaving tomorrow," she said, because someone had to say it. "Unless the weather is too bad, in which case I will leave as soon as it clears." Declan set his mug down. "Where are you headed? South, probably. There is usually work in the valleys through winter. Wood cutting or hauling or something. And if there is not," she shrugged, Then I will find something else." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Then he said, "What if you stayed?" Her heart did something strange in her chest, a hard, uneven thump that made her breath catch. "Stayed here," he said, "through winter. There is still work to be done. The flock needs tending, and I could use an extra pair of hands when lambing starts in spring. And even if there was not work, I would not send you out into that." He nodded toward the window, where the snow was falling harder now, thick and fast. She stared at him. "You are offering me work through winter." "I am offering you a place to stay," he said. "Work too if you want it. But mostly just a place. You do not have to leave." Her throat felt tight. "Why?" "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I would rather have you here than worry about you freezing in some ditch." She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, pressing against her teeth, desperate to be spoken. But she had been turned away too many times, had been told she was welcome only to find out later that the welcome had conditions. She needed to be sure. "Declan," she said carefully, "what are you really asking?" He looked at her, and his expression shifted into something more serious, more careful. "I am asking if you will stay. That is all. No strings, no expectations. You can have your own room, same as you had in the bunkhouse, only warmer. You can eat at my table or not, as you like. You can work or rest, or leave in the spring if that is what you want. I am only asking if you will let me keep you safe through winter." She felt something crack open inside her, something she had kept locked and quiet for a very long time. She thought of the cold nights ahead, the empty roads, the closed doors. She thought of this house, warm and solid, and Declan standing in front of her with his open face and his steady voice, offering her something no one else ever had. "Will you keep me when winter comes?" She asked, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "I will keep you," he said. "You can have my warmest room." She believed him. She moved into the house the next morning. The warmest room, it turned out, was a small bedroom on the south side, with a window that caught the early sun and a fireplace that shared a chimney with the kitchen. It was the nicest place she had ever slept. The bed had a real mattress, not just straw, and there were blankets piled thick enough to drown in. Declan carried her pack upstairs for her, set it on the chair by the window, and told her to settle in. "There is a lock on the door if you want it," he said. "And if you need anything, I am just down the hall." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He left her alone, and she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to understand what had just happened. She had been offered work before, and shelter, but never like this. Never with such easy generosity, as though it cost him nothing to give her a place in his home. She did not know what to do with that. She did not know how to hold it without breaking it, but she would learn. The first week passed quietly. The snow fell and fell, piling up against the fences and drifting across the yard, until the world outside was white and silent and still. Renna spent her days tending the flock, checking the sheep for signs of illness or injury, making sure they had hay and water. Declan worked beside her most days, his hands quick and sure, his voice calm when the animals startled. They fell into a rhythm without meaning to, each of them knowing what needed to be done and doing it without fuss. In the evenings, they ate together in the kitchen. Declan cooked, mostly, because he said he liked it, and because Renna admitted she had never learned to make anything more complicated than porridge. He made stews and roasts and thick soups that tasted like comfort, and she ate until her belly was full and warm. They talked, sometimes about the flock or the weather or the valley below. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. Renna found herself watching him when he was not looking. The way he moved, easy and unhurried as though he had all the time in the world. The way he smiled when she said something that amused him, his whole face lighting up. The way he listened when she spoke, his attention focused and complete, as though nothing else mattered. She had never known anyone like him. Most men either ignored her or stared at her like she was something dangerous, but Declan did neither. He simply treated her like a person, and that was a rarer thing than it should have been. She did not realize she was falling for him until it was too late to stop. It happened slowly, and then all at once. One morning she woke and thought of him before she thought of anything else. One evening, she found herself laughing at something he said, real laughter, the kind that came from deep in her chest and left her breathless. One night she lay in bed and listened to the sound of him moving around in his room down the hall, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt since she was a child. It scared her. She had spent her whole life moving, never staying long enough to put down roots, never letting herself care too much about the places she left behind. Caring made leaving harder, and leaving was inevitable. But Declan had asked her to stay, and she had stayed, and now she was tangled up in him in ways she did not know how to undo. She did not know if he felt the same. He was kind to her always, but he was kind to everyone. The few times neighbors stopped by, he greeted them with the same warmth he showed her, the same easy hospitality. She told herself it did not mean anything. He had offered her shelter because he was a good man, not because he wanted anything from her. She should be grateful for that, and she was. But she also wanted more, and that wanting was a new and dangerous thing. Winter deepened. The days grew short and cold, the sun barely rising above the hills before it sank again into darkness. The snow kept falling, and the drifts grew taller, until the world shrank down to the house and the barn and the narrow paths they shoveled between them. Supplies grew tighter. Declan had stocked up before the snow came, but he had stocked for one, not two, and Renna could see him counting sacks of grain and jars of preserves with a worried expression he tried to hide. She brought it up one night after supper. "You did not plan for 2 mouths to feed." He looked up from the pot he was washing. "We will be fine, Declan. We will be fine," he said again, more firmly. "I have enough. It will last." She did not believe him, but she did not argue. Instead, she started eating less, taking smaller portions, claiming she was not hungry even when her stomach growled. Declan noticed, of course, and started putting more food on her plate when she was not looking. It became a quiet battle between them, each trying to make sure the other had enough, neither willing to admit how thin the stores were running. One morning, she went to the barn and found him standing in front of the grain bin, staring at it with an expression that made her chest hurt. There was maybe a quarter left, enough for a few more weeks if they were careful. She walked up beside him and said nothing, just stood there, and after a moment he let out a long breath and sat down on a hay bale. "I thought I had more," he said quietly. "I thought I planned it right this time." "This time," he rubbed a hand over his face. 3 years ago I nearly lost the station, had a bad lambing season, lost half the flock, and then winter came early and hard. I did not have enough feed, did not have enough coin to buy more, and I had to watch the sheep starve because I could not provide for them. Neighbors came by and offered to buy the land cheap, said I was in over my head, said I should sell before I lost everything. He looked at her, and his eyes were dark and tired. I did not sell. I borrowed money I could not afford to pay back, bought feed at twice the price, and barely made it through. It took me 2 years to dig out of that hole. I swore I would never let it happen again." "But you invited me to stay," Renna said slowly. "Even though it meant stretching what you had." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because some things matter more than grain." Her heart clenched. She wanted to touch him, to put her hand on his shoulder or take his hand in hers, but she did not know if she was allowed. So instead, she said, "We will make it through. We have enough." "Renna, we do," she said firmly. "I have lived through lean times before. I know how to make a little go a long way, and if it comes to it, I can hunt. There are deer in the hills and rabbits. We will not starve." He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something warm and wondering. "You are not worried." "I am worried," she admitted. "But I am not afraid, not with you." He smiled, small and tired but real. "Not with you either." They made it through another week, and then another, rationing the grain and stretching the preserves as far as they would go. Renna set snares in the woods and brought back 2 rabbits and a grouse, which Declan cooked into meals that tasted better than they had any right to. They ate less, moved slower to save their strength, and went to bed early to conserve firewood. It was hard, but it was not unbearable. They had each other, and that made all the difference. Then the blizzard came. It started in the middle of the night, a howling wind that rattled the shutters and drove the snow sideways against the house. Renna woke to the sound of it, her heart pounding, and lay still in the darkness listening. She had been through storms before, but this one felt different, meaner, like something alive and angry. She heard Declan moving around downstairs, and after a moment she got up and pulled on her boots and coat. He was in the kitchen, dressed and pale, staring out the window. "We need to check the flock," he said when he saw her. "If the barn door came loose, they will scatter and we will lose them." "Then we go now," Renna said. They went out into the storm together, roping themselves to the porch railing so they would not lose their way in the whiteout. The wind hit them like a fist, stealing the breath from Renna's lungs and driving snow into her eyes. She could barely see Declan ahead of her, just a dark shape in the swirling white. They stumbled across the yard, clinging to the rope, and made it to the barn by sheer luck and stubbornness. Inside, the sheep were huddled together, bleeding and restless but safe. The door was still latched and the roof was holding. Renna felt the tension drain out of her shoulders. They were all right. The flock was all right. But then Declan said, "The ewes." She turned and saw what he was looking at. 3 of the pregnant ewes were lying down, panting hard, their sides heaving. They were in labor, all 3 of them, and they were struggling. "It is too early," Declan said, his voice tight with panic. "They are not supposed to lamb for another month." The stress of the storm must have triggered it. Renna moved before she could think, kneeling beside the nearest ewe and running her hands over her belly. The lamb was turned wrong, she could feel it, stuck and unable to move. If they did not help, both mother and baby would die. She looked up at Declan and saw her own fear reflected in his face. "I can do this," she said, "but I need you to trust me." "I trust you," he said immediately. She had helped with difficult births before, but never 3 at once, never in the middle of a blizzard with the wind screaming outside and the lantern light flickering. She worked by instinct and desperation, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. She reached inside the first ewe and found the lamb's legs, pulled gently, carefully, until the tiny body slid free into the straw. The ewe struggled to her feet and started licking the baby clean, and Renna moved to the second. Declan worked beside her, following her instructions, his hands shaking but sure. Together, they brought all 3 lambs into the world, alive and squirming. By the time they finished, Renna's arms were aching and her clothes were soaked with sweat and blood and birth fluids, but she had never felt more alive. Declan sat back on his heels and let out a long, shaky breath. "You saved them." "We saved them," Renna corrected. He looked at her, and his expression was so full of admiration and gratitude and something else, something bigger, that she felt her chest tighten. Then he reached out and took her hand, his fingers cold and rough and strong, and said, I do not know what I would do without you." She squeezed his hand and did not let go. "You will never have to find out." The blizzard blew itself out by morning, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. It took them 2 days to dig out, shoveling paths to the barn and the wood pile and the well. The work was exhausting, but Renna did not mind. She liked the burn in her muscles, the cold air in her lungs, the way Declan worked beside her without complaint. They were a team now, in a way they had not been before, bound together by the storm and the lambs and the quiet certainty that they could survive anything as long as they had each other. But the storm had cost them. The supplies that had been tight before were dangerously low now, and there was still a month of winter left, maybe more. Declan started talking about selling some of the flock to buy grain, but Renna could see how much the thought hurt him. The sheep were his livelihood, his future. Selling them now would mean starting over from nothing. She made a decision. 2 days after the blizzard, a neighbor came by on horseback, a lean man named Garrett with a sharp face and sharper eyes. He had been trying to buy Declan's land for years, always showing up when things were hard, always offering just enough to be tempting but not enough to be fair. Renna did not like him, and she liked him even less when he walked into the barn and looked around with a calculating expression. "Heard you had trouble with the storm," Garrett said. "Thought I would stop by and see how you were managing." "We are managing fine," Declan said, his voice carefully neutral. "That's so." Garrett's gaze slid to the grain bin, which was nearly empty, then to the ewes and their newborn lambs. "Lambing early this year, that is risky. If you lose too many, you might not have enough stock to make it worth keeping the station." He paused. "My offer still stands, you know. I will give you a fair price, enough to start fresh somewhere else." "I am not selling," Declan said. Garrett shrugged. "Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He left, and Declan stood in the middle of the barn with his hands clenched into fists. "He will be back," he said quietly. "He always comes back when he thinks I am weak." "Then we make sure he has no reason to come back," Renna said. She spent the next week working harder than she had ever worked in her life. She checked every ewe, every lamb, watching for signs of illness or injury. She reinforced the barn, patched holes in the roof, made sure the water troughs were clean and the hay was dry. She set more snares and brought back enough meat to stretch their supplies a little further. She barely slept, barely rested, because she could see how much this place meant to Declan, and she would be damned if she let him lose it. Declan noticed, of course. He tried to make her slow down, told her she was pushing too hard, but she waved him off. "I am fine," she said. "I have done worse." "That does not mean you should," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her stop and look at him. He was standing in the doorway of the barn, silhouetted against the pale winter light, and he looked tired and worried and something else, something that made her heart skip. "Renna," he said quietly, "why are you doing this?" She could have lied. She could have told him it was just work, just her way of earning her keep. But she was too tired to lie, and she did not want to lie to him anyway. "Because I do not want you to lose this place," she said. "Because I know what it means to you. Because she stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Because you what?" he asked, and he was closer now, close enough that she could see the worry in his eyes. "Because I care about you," she said, and her voice came out rough and unsteady. "I care about you, and I want you to be happy, and I cannot stand the thought of you losing something you love." He stared at her, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight and warm and safe. "I care about you too," he said against her hair. "More than I should, more than I know what to do with. I have been falling for you since the day you asked me to keep you, and I do not want you to leave when spring comes. I want you to stay." Not as a drover, not as hired help, but as he pulled back just enough to look at her. As mine. If you will have me, her breath caught. You mean that? I have never meant anything more in my life. She kissed him, and it was clumsy and desperate and perfect. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones, and she leaned into him and let herself believe, finally, that this was real. That he wanted her the way she wanted him. That she was allowed to have this. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "So you will stay?" Declan asked. "I will stay," Renna said, "for as long as you will have me." "Then you are staying forever," he said, and kissed her again. They made it through the rest of winter together, and it was still hard, still lean, but it did not matter because they had each other. The flock survived, all 3 early lambs thriving against the odds. When Garrett came by again a few weeks later, Declan met him at the gate and told him, politely but firmly, that the station was not for sale and never would be. Garrett looked past him to where Renna stood in the yard, her arms crossed and her expression calm and unyielding, and something in his face shifted. He nodded once and rode away, and he did not come back. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in patches, the hills turning green again. The ewes lambed in earnest, and this time every birth went smoothly, the lambs strong and healthy and loud. Renna worked beside Declan from dawn to dusk, and every night they fell into bed together, exhausted and content. One morning, she woke before him and lay there watching the sun rise through the window. The light was golden and warm, spilling across the bed, across Declan's sleeping face. She felt something settle inside her, something that had been restless and uncertain for as long as she could remember. She felt like she was home. Declan stirred and opened his eyes, and when he saw her looking at him, he smiled. "Morning, morning," she said. He reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I have been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," he laughed, soft and warm. "I want to marry you." Her heart skipped. "You do?" "I do," he said. "I know we have not been together long, and I know it is fast, but I have never been more sure of anything. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build something with you here on this land. He stopped, his voice catching. "I want you to know that you are not just welcome, you are wanted, you are loved." She felt her eyes sting, and she blinked hard against the tears. "I want that too." "Then marry me," he said. "Please." "Yes," she said, and pulled him down into a kiss. They were married a month later in the small stone church in the valley. It was a simple ceremony, just the 2 of them and the priest and a handful of neighbors who had come to see the orc woman marry the sheep station master. Some of them looked skeptical, but most of them looked curious, and a few even smiled. Renna did not care what they thought. She only cared about Declan, standing beside her in his good coat, his hand warm and steady in hers. When the priest asked if they would love and honor each other, Renna said, "I will," and meant it with every part of herself. When Declan slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple band of silver that had belonged to his grandmother, she felt something click into place, something that had been waiting her whole life to be found. They walked back to the station together as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The lambs were out in the pasture, small and white and loud, and the air smelled like grass and new growth. Declan put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, and they stood there for a long time just looking at the land, at the flock, at the life they had built together. "Are you happy?" Declan asked. "I am," Renna said. "I really am." "Good," he said. "Because I plan to keep you happy for a very long time." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "You already promised to keep me when winter comes. That is all I need." "Then I will keep that promise," he said. "Every winter for the rest of our lives. the years that followed were good ones. The flock grew, and so did their reputation. People came from all over the valley to buy their wool and their lambs, and word spread that the orc woman on the Ashford station knew her sheep better than anyone. Some of the neighbors who had been skeptical at first started coming to Renna for advice when their own flocks had trouble, and she helped them without hesitation. Slowly, grudgingly, the valley accepted her, and then more than accepted her. She became part of the fabric of the place, as much a fixture as the hills and the stone walls. Declan thrived too. The worry that had shadowed him that first winter faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. He laughed more, smiled more, and every time Renna looked at him, she felt a rush of gratitude that this man, this good and steady man, was hers. They talked about children sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and they were tangled up in each other. Renna wanted them, but she was also nervous. She did not know if orc and human children were even possible, and if they were, she did not know what the world would make of them. Declan told her it did not matter, that they would face whatever came together, and that was enough to make her believe it might be all right. The first time she realized she might be pregnant, it was early autumn and she was out checking the flock. She felt dizzy suddenly, her stomach turning over, and she had to sit down in the grass and put her head between her knees. Declan found her there and knelt beside her, his hand on her back, his voice full of worry. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said. "I just felt strange for a moment." He helped her back to the house and made her lie down, and for the next few days he watched her like a hawk. The dizziness came and went, and so did the nausea, and after a week, Renna could not deny what was happening. She was pregnant. She and Declan were going to have a child. When she told him, he went very still, his eyes wide and bright. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his shoulders shake as he cried against her hair. "I am going to be a father," he said, his voice thick with wonder and disbelief. "You are," Renna said, and she was crying too, happy tears that she did not bother to wipe away. The pregnancy was not easy. Renna had never been sick a day in her life, but carrying a child turned her inside out. She was tired all the time, and her stomach rebelled against half the food she had always loved. Declan fussed over her constantly, making her rest when she wanted to work, bringing her tea and toast, and anything else he thought might help. It drove her a little crazy, but it also made her love him even more. As her belly grew, so did the valley's curiosity. People started stopping by more often, bringing gifts of food and cloth and offering awkward congratulations. Some of them asked questions carefully about what the baby might look like, whether it would have tusks or pointed ears or green skin. Renna did not know, and she said so. She would love the child no matter what, and so would Declan. That was all that mattered. The baby came in the middle of spring, on a morning so bright and beautiful it felt like the world was holding its breath. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Renna thought she might not survive it. But Declan stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her face, telling her she was strong and brave and that she could do this. And she did. The baby was a girl, small and squalling and perfect. She had green-tinged skin, paler than Renna's but darker than Declan's, and tiny pointed ears that stuck out from beneath her dark hair. Her eyes were bright and curious, and when Declan held her for the first time, he looked at Renna with such joy and love that she felt her heart might burst. "She is beautiful," he said. "She is ours," Renna said, and reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. They named her Bryn, and she was everything they had hoped for and more. She grew quickly, strong and healthy, and from the beginning she had her father's easy warmth and her mother's quiet determination. Renna had never imagined she could love anything as much as she loved that little girl, and watching Declan with her, gentle and patient and utterly devoted, made her fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm. The flock still needed tending and the station still needed work, but now there was also a baby to feed and change and rock to sleep. It was exhausting and wonderful, and Renna would not have traded it for anything. As Bryn grew, so did the valley's acceptance of her. The neighbors who came by cooed over her and brought her little gifts, and the ones who had been skeptical about Renna softened when they saw her with her daughter. It was hard to hate someone who so clearly loved their child. When Bryn was 2, Renna found herself pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. She knew what to expect, and her body seemed to handle it better. Declan was still a nervous wreck, but he hid it better, and Renna teased him about it until he laughed. The second baby was a boy, bigger than Bryn had been, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Finn, and he was loud and demanding and impossible not to love. Bryn adored him, toddling over to his cradle to pat his head and babble at him in a language only she understood. The years passed, full and rich and good. The station prospered, and so did the family. Renna and Declan added another room onto the house, and then another, making space for the children and for the life they were building. They worked hard, but they also made time to rest, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun set over the hills while the children played in the yard. Renna still thought sometimes about the girl she had been, the one who had moved from place to place with no home and no one to call her own. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. She had found her place, here on this hillside with this man and these children. She had found her home. One evening, when Bryn was 6 and Finn was 4, Declan came out to the porch where Renna was sitting and sank down beside her with a contented sigh. The children were chasing each other through the grass, their laughter bright and clear in the cooling air. "Do you ever think about that first winter?" Declan asked. Renna smiled. "Sometimes. I was so scared," he admitted. "Scared I could not provide for you, scared I would fail you the way I failed the flock that other year, but you stayed anyway. You promised me your warmest room," Renna said. "And you gave me so much more than that." "You gave me more too," he said. "You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to believe I could do better. You gave me a family, a future. You gave me everything." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat there together in the golden light, watching their children play. The hills were green and full of life, the flock was strong, and the house was warm. Winter would come again, as it always did, but they would face it together and they would be all right. Because Declan had promised to keep her, and he had kept that promise every single day. And Renna had promised to stay, and she had stayed, and she would keep staying for as long as they both lived. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the life they had built together. Bryn grew tall and quick, with her mother's instinct for animals and her father's easy way with people. She could gentle a spooked ewe with a touch and a soft word, and she spent her days trailing after Renna, asking 1,000 questions about the flock and the land. Finn was different, more boisterous and restless, always climbing things he should not climb and getting into mischief that made Declan shake his head and laugh. But he had a good heart, and when his sister needed him, he was always there. Renna loved watching them grow, loved seeing pieces of herself and Declan in their faces and their gestures. She had worried once that the world would be cruel to them, that people would see their mixed heritage and turn them away. But the valley had changed, slowly, and by the time Bryn and Finn were old enough to understand prejudice, most of the neighbors had learned to see past it. There were still a few who muttered and looked askance, but they were outnumbered by the ones who waved and smiled and invited the family to gatherings. The station continued to grow. Declan and Renna added more sheep, improved the pastures, built a new barn that was twice the size of the old one. They hired help during lambing season, young men and women from the valley who were eager to learn, and Renna taught them everything she knew. Some of them were wary of her at first, but they learned quickly that she was fair and patient and that she knew sheep better than anyone. By the time they left, most of them called her a friend. One year, when Bryn was 10 and Finn was 8, a late spring storm rolled through the valley, bringing hail and lightning and winds that tore shingles off the roof. The children huddled in the kitchen with Renna while Declan went out to check on the flock, and Renna held them close and told them stories to keep them calm. When Declan came back, soaked and shivering, he reported that the sheep were safe, but that part of the fence had come down. They would need to repair it before the flock wandered off. The whole family went out the next morning to fix it, even the children. Bryn held the posts steady while Declan hammered them in, and Finn fetched nails and tools without being asked. Renna worked beside them, her hands sure and steady, and by the time the sun was high, the fence was whole again. They stood together in the mud and the trampled grass, tired and dirty and proud, and Declan put his arm around Renna's shoulders and said, "We make a good team." "We always have," Renna said. That summer they had visitors. A family of orcs came through the valley, traveling merchants who sold woven goods and pottery. They stopped at the station to water their horses, and when they saw Renna, their faces lit up with recognition and relief. It had been a long time since they had seen another orc, they said, and longer still since they had seen one living among humans without fear. Renna invited them to stay for supper, and they accepted. The evening was full of laughter and stories. The orc family telling tales of their travels and Renna sharing her own story of how she had come to the station and stayed. The children listened, wide-eyed, and Bryn asked a dozen questions about the places the merchants had been and the things they had seen. When the family left the next morning, they thanked Renna and Declan for their hospitality and said they would spread the word that the Ashford station was a good place, a safe place. Declan watched them go, then turned to Renna. "Do you ever miss it? Traveling, seeing new places?" "No," Renna said honestly. "I have everything I need right here." "Good," he said and kissed her forehead, "because I am not letting you go." As the children grew older, they began to take on more responsibility. Bryn was 12 when she helped birth her first lamb on her own, and Declan beamed with pride when she came running to tell him. Finn was 10 when he fixed a broken gate without being asked, and Renner ruffled his hair and told him he was becoming a fine young man. They were growing up, and it was bittersweet, but Renna was grateful for every moment. One autumn evening, when the air was crisp and the leaves were turning gold, Renna and Declan sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. The flock was settled in the lower pasture, and the house was quiet and warm. Declan reached over and took Renna's hand, his thumb brushing over the silver ring she still wore. "You remember the first time you asked me to keep you?" he said. "Of course," Renna said. "I was scared out of my mind." "I was too," Declan admitted. "I thought I was making a promise I might not be able to keep. I was so afraid I would let you down, that I would not be enough." "You were more than enough," Renna said. "You were everything." "You were everything too," he said. "You still are." "I do not think I ever told you that properly. You saved me, Renna. You saved this place and you saved me, and I will never stop being grateful for that." She felt her throat tighten. "You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me a family, a future, a life I never thought I would have. If anyone was saved, it was me." "Then we saved each other," Declan said and pulled her close. They sat there together as the stars came out, holding each other in the quiet dark. The world outside was vast and full of uncertainty, but here on this hillside they were safe. They were home. Winter came again, as it always did, and this time Renna welcomed it. She no longer feared the cold or the snow or the long dark nights. She had Declan beside her, and the children, and the flock, and the warm, solid house that had become her refuge. The years had taught her that winter was not something to be endured but something to be embraced, because it made the spring all the sweeter. On the first snowfall of the season, Bryn and Finn ran outside to catch flakes on their tongues, and Renna watched them from the porch with a smile. Declan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They are happy," he said. "They are," Renna agreed. "So am I," he said. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." "Me too," Renna said and leaned back into him. The snow fell softly around them, blanketing the hills and the flock and the house in white. It was beautiful and quiet and perfect, and Renna thought about the girl she had been all those years ago, standing at the gate in the cold and asking if she would be kept. She had been so uncertain then, so afraid of being turned away. But Declan had promised her his warmest room, and he had given her so much more. He had given her a home, a family, a love that lasted through every season. He had kept his promise, and she had kept hers, and together they had built something strong and beautiful and enduring. As the children's laughter rang out across the snowy yard, Renna closed her eyes and let herself feel the fullness of it all. The warmth of Declan's arms around her, the sound of her children playing, the smell of wood smoke and pine, the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had asked him to keep her, and he had. And she would stay through every winter, through every spring, through every season of their lives, because this was her home and he was her heart, and nothing would ever change that. The years stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, and Renna knew they would face them together, just as they always had. Winter would come and go, the flock would grow and thrive, the children would become adults and perhaps have families of their own. But through it all, she and Declan would remain steady and constant, two people who had found each other in the cold and built a life together in the warmth. And that was more than enough. That was everything. The snow continued to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Inside the house, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth spread through every room, chasing away the cold. Renna thought of the warmest room, the one Declan had promised her all those years ago, and she realized that it was not just a room. It was this house, this life, this family. It was the love they had built together, piece by piece, season by season. She had asked him to keep her when winter came, and he had kept her through every winter since. And she had kept him too, through every hardship and every joy, because that was what love meant. It meant staying, even when it was hard. It meant building something together and tending it carefully, like a flock or a garden or a fire on a cold night. And it meant knowing, deep in your bones, that you were home,